Good morning and welcome everyone. Today the workshop is on the annual plan 2026, 2025-2026 CAPEX update, and the purpose of this workshop is to provide an update on the current status of the capital program for the 26-27 annual plan and provide opportunities for elected members to have some input into that program. So happy to hand over. We've got James, are you leading today? Okay, and I know we've got Catherine there as well. So hand over to you guys.
Yeah, thank you. Normally Susan will be sitting here, but she's away, so I've got Catherine here. So she's our detail person, so you have to forgive me if I can't get quite into the detail. But I've got the project teams here as well. So any specific projects, they can answer any questions. So I guess the purpose of today is just to give you an idea of where the program's landed, where in the program you've got the ability to influence any change. We've also got an example, if required, to just go through the minor safety bulk fund and how the projects within there are prioritised, because I know there's a bit of interest in that. And also we just this morning just circulated, I guess, the other bulk funds that exist within the program and what that kind of makes up in terms of other areas where there's not as much detail around the projects to make those up, but we can always come back to those. And then I guess the purpose mainly is to seek a bit of direction prior to any further refinements to the program before adopting the draft annual plan. So back in September we presented a program that was about 634 million. Over the last couple of months that's been revised down, primarily just focused on risk and deliverability, down to 498. Comparatively to the LTP, that's lower as well by about 60 odd million. So we haven't gone into any prioritisation around strategic direction at this stage. It's been mainly around providing, hey, here's from a risk point of view projects you probably don't want to change too much, and then a sense check in terms of the deliverability of projects, where they're at, project readiness, and I guess the cash flow timing. Should note that the program will evolve over the next few months as well as we get more certainty on what's going to land for this financial year and what potentially gets carried forward into 26, 27, and then over the next couple of months there's probably a number of papers coming on specific projects that'll get reflected in changes into the 26, 27 program as well. Back in September we presented a big rock kind of diagram that just gives you an indication of, I guess, the bigger investments across the LTP and where that's landed. So the red line is an assumed limit. At the moment it's still got waters in there beyond 27, and you can see we're just under for 27, but we've got a bit of a bow wave coming up in the next few years, which will be, I guess, a topic of discussion for the LTP primarily. From a funding point of view, predominantly most of the program's funded through debt, either through loans, DCs or the reserves, depreciation reserves, and then there's a few external funding or funding mechanisms that sit within the program as well. So what's been provided to you is, I guess, a breakdown of that 498 categorised into what's already going to be committed in terms of the program, what's in renewals, what through this year's program will probably be committed to construction before or just on the start of the next financial year, what we've deemed as kind of critical projects, sort of fundamentally core infrastructure projects, and then the balance of the program that I guess is a conversation about where you want to go with that. And I guess the crux of it is we're just looking for direction and feedback on where in that program are there projects that maybe should have their scope adjusted. Are there projects in that list of that you want to defer or stop? Are there projects not currently in the program that you want to bring in and discuss? From a bulk fund perspective, we can go into the minor safety one if you want. And then I guess that discussion and direction, we'll get feedback, we'll make any adjustments or provide further information back to council in terms of where those projects land. Another discussion point is just around program management we wanted to talk about. So I don't know if you want to talk to this one, Catherine.
So it's not so much the value for money heading, but just the way that we have dealt with the providing the flexibility into the capital program that you need as we start working in projects. So when we do our annual plans and definitely in our long-term plans, the timing is always the best guess of when we're going to be ready, when's the right time, the sort of phasing between related projects, things like that. And then as the year progresses, things change, and some things may need to be brought forward or things are slowed down. And because of the scale of the teams we have and the sort of kind of longer term deadlines that they might be working to, program managers might look to bring forward some projects because others are held up. And the kind of budgetary practice we've had to date has been, we've called it a dollar in, dollar out approach, where if things are slowing down or things need to be brought forward, that the program managers will look at their budgets and assess where things, they might say, well, hey, can I bring forward or go faster on this project here because this other one that's not related but it's part of our budgeted portfolio is going to go slower, it's going to be an underspend at year end. And there's been an element of CE delegation so that we can kind of quite rapidly respond to that. So through the quarterly monitoring, we're now looking at these 3 monthly budget changes. That would be a very slow process to achieve the same thing. So we're just wanting to talk about expectations or views on that process, that sort of way of saying, yes, you can bring forward that because that's held up. What information you would like other than reporting on that, or are you not comfortable with that process? We just want to bring up that discussion today. Well, James, probably revert to James regarding the contingency story. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess that program management does extend out to contingency, so we hold the contingency at a project level, and I guess alongside that program and portfolio management, there is an opportunity to look at program and portfolio contingency. So currently across the 498 that's in 26-27, approximately 10% of that is held in contingency, so 50 mil, but that's identified against specific projects. There could be an opportunity at a program or portfolio level to raise it up. Our systems aren't built in a most efficient way to manage that side of it, so it would be probably an additional resource to do it that way, but it does open up, I guess, some opportunities around managing that at that high level and through that kind of program management, a little bit more flexibility.
Yeah, I think on that, I'm to be honest, I don't really mind too much my personal view around whether it's done at a project level or done at an overall program level. What I would like to see though is every single time we see a project, we see the number, we see the contingency and we see the total. So when we're talking 498, I want to see that that's 450 plus 48, of contingency equals 498. And when we get reported back that we can see those, so we get that granular detail, we know exactly every year what's been spent out of a contingency, what we got back. So that's just from a standardisation. Every time we see a number, I want it broken into the number for that project and then the number for the contingency with the total there, because that just gives us a much better see-through. And this is the problem, we have at the moment, and the same when we're looking at, we just had the capital update for the first quarter. So I want to see, that again in those 3 columns. So, if we say we deliver 100 million of projects in the last quarter, I want to see we delivered 80 million of project, we used 20 million of contingency, and we've spent a total of 100 million. I think that's where we need to get to, because we have no view, 415 or whatever it was million last year, we have no idea whether, is that a good or a bad thing? Because is that because we just underspent, or is it that we actually delivered 50% of the projects but we used 120% of the contingency? Like, we've got no view over that at the moment. So I think if we could just break those into 3 columns every single time we talk about a project, every single time we talk about the capital program. And I guess just my question to you, talking about the systems, I'm guessing the systems record that already, so it should just be able to spit it out, or?
It can spit it out at project level. It'd be, if we talked about program and portfolio, that's where it gets a little bit tricky. But certainly
so that's fine. So as long as we can spit it out at project level, that's perfect. So we don't have to change any systems, it's easy, but then we just add it all up and then we get that sort of program view, I guess, of it. Yeah, that would just be really helpful going forward. Yeah, Councillor, correct.
Now, just in terms of the dollar in, dollar out approach, I'd prefer just to bank savings, whatever the savings are. Could be contingency or other budgets that weren't spent. Particularly given, the bow wave, which you've alluded to. And if that approach was taken, would that have a big impact in terms of smoothing of resourcing, etc., or what sort of impact would that have if we took the just bank the savings approach?
So dollar in, dollar out isn't really regarding savings, it's regarding which of the projects are moving faster. So if you're spending 10 million on 2 projects in each of the years, it's like, well, actually we're only going to spend, we'd budgeted to spend the whole 10 on this project, we're only going to spend 5 on this project, but we can start the other one, and then we'll still just do the other 10 million the following year. It's a timing thing to enable effective achievement of the portfolio, but we do have...
I think those also are good examples of Granada Street, because we made a decision to try to speed that up. So if we're going to put a project in, at the moment, we're not just adding to the budget, we're actually saying, okay, well, that's going in, but you can't do something else. So it's that prioritisation. But I agree, Rick, it's not just, oh, look, we're underspending, we'll just go and smash out all these other projects.
But that's a good conversation, because we have said if it's that we do want the savings, but if we put something else in, something else has to come out. But we haven't actually got a process, because we have signed off 502,499, whatever adjustments we made this week for capital projects. If there are savings, is our process that anything new or brought forward has to come to us, or at a certain level it has to come to us? What is that process? So if you've got a project that's of the 10 million, we're going to anticipate that we can actually spend 4 on one and 6 on the other, but they're both 5 and 5. The 6 is actually brought forward from the previous year, and the 4 might want to go to the next year. But what is our process for sign-off for those 2 changes? Is everything coming to us for that?
So every quarter we do identify what's a saving, what is something that has been brought forward under delegation, or if it's bigger, would come to you for those bring forward decisions.
And so what's the max delegation that's allowed? What's Marty's delegation for projects to bring?
Actually, for bring forward, he is allowed to just bring forward under delegation.
So there's no limit,
there's
no financial limit?
Written limit. He would tend to be very cautious about what he would bring forward though, and would be.
And we report it as a number, right, don't we?
Record it, yeah.
Okay.
And it has to be a project within the LTP, so it can't be a new project. It's already got to be budgeted within the LTP to be able to bring it forward. But I guess that's a good discussion to hear, to understand the expectation, because that helps the delivery teams understand exactly what they need to do, and that flexibility without waiting for that update quarterly means they've got, you know, the time to make changes, and then if it's just an update that's expected within delegations, and that makes life a lot clearer, I guess, for staff.
And I guess please just recognise that you don't always have to wait for an end of a quarter to have that meeting. We can actually receive emails that are informing so that we're not surprised when the quarter report comes.
And maybe so we could do something around when those come through, an informal update through Marty.
Significant.
Yep. These are just some general slides on how the program's allocated across the activities. I guess one question we had, which maybe Catherine can ask because I'm not really sure the background of it, is how we present growth levels of service and renewals. So the GOR versus the GOR plus stacks. So yeah.
So we have talked about this a little bit before. Under the financial regulations and the infrastructure strategy, we have to talk about categorising projects by growth, level of service, or renewals. There's a very loose definition of that because most projects are a combination of renewal funding or an upgrade as well as the renewal, or a growth project which also has elements of improvement in level of service. So there aren't that many projects that sit solely 100% funded by one of the categories, but under the requirements we have to nominate a category. So the feedback that we received in the time of the commissioners is that they were finding a lot of people saying, but you're doing mainly growth projects, you're not doing anything for the city. And they're saying, but then you tell us that this is 50% level of service for the city, but you're telling us it's just a growth project. So we were asked to amend the information to say, yes, some of these growth projects do include benefits to the city now, and so that's why that other category was formed. So we do both. When the projects are entered in our corporate planning system, the project managers will identify, is this primary purpose growth or is the primary purpose level of service or primary purpose renewals, and so that's how you get the GOR, just the idea of primary purpose. It's not related to the funding. This graph was calculated relating to the funding, and if it was a significant, it was 90% growth, it would still sit in growth, but if it's a significant, say 50-50 or 40-60, it would sit in that brown category. So we always produce the simple one, the growth, level of service and renewal, and there was some discussion recently, so it's just an opportunity for elected members to consider, do you want to keep with the 4 categories on occasion or not?
So I guess the question is, what do you have in your... the question is, what do you have in your system? You know, like at a project level, do you have that this is 50% growth, 50% level of service? You've got that in your system.
Yes, so you determine that you determine the funding in the system, and that drives the whole budgetary impact, because if it's growth, it's going to go to a growth reserve. If it's level of service, it's loan funding, which is rates funded interest.
So you've got that at the moment. So maybe that's where we want to see it, because I don't think seeing, you know, that it's 50% growth and then we see it as a line as a growth project, that's not very useful. What would be better is to, if we know it's 50% level of service and 50% growth, we see that effectively there's a, you know, that those numbers, this graph should reflect that it's 50% of that project and 100% of that project and 70% of that project, and that should be the numbers we have, if you get what I mean. Sorry.
I do, and that's how that graph is built up.
Okay, it's
a simple graph. If you wanted to put every project that's 30%, it would be very complicated, or if it's in a table.
No, not
yeah.
very good, like just even simpler than that, because you take out the growth and level of service, because you don't need that one, because it's split, at every project, it's split into how much is growth, how much is level of service, and how much is...
okay, so you're wanting a funding graph.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's a different
Because
thing to a
that's,
project
yeah,
graph.
like,
Right.
rather than its primary, the primary purpose to me is actually, well, I don't know, I'll let my colleagues decide, but the funding, the primary purpose of that project, that's actually got no benefit to me at all, because it doesn't tell you the full story, whereas the actually understanding where the funding comes from, that would be a much more useful story, that, you know, 60% of the 500 million is actually going on growth components of projects. Yeah.
Yeah, so funding is in that. We normally do that in a pie graph.
Yeah, but it's actually like, yes, that's good, because DC's is growth. So it is kind of a funding, but it's actually seeing, you know, like let's say it's a $2 million project. So, and it's 50% growth. So 1 million of that is growth. So you actually break down those things as this is the portion of that budget that is growth.
So you're asking
levels.
that for each project in the schedules that we give you, you're wanting the funding sources for each project?
Yeah, well, it doesn't need to be like loans, depreciation reserves, DCs. It's actually just growth, level of service, renewals. Like, those are your three things, isn't it?
So that's a requirement for the purpose that we have to do under the financial regulations and the requirements of the Local Government Act. We have no choice. We have to do graphs like that say this project's primary purpose has been...
Well, I'm not talking about primary purpose. If a project is split over the three, I want to see that I want a graph that has, out of 500 million, see, this is primary purpose, isn't it? So that's not what I want. I want that same graph, but every project granularly broken down into 50%, 20%, 30%.
Except you won't, because you'll have 10% as NZTA, or you'll have all the other funding. Otherwise, it's not going to be correct.
But you know, so we don't have, like, when you say primary purpose, so we look at the project and we go primary purpose and we just put growth in there. We don't say this is growth 50%, 20% level of service, 30% renewals.
We do. So in the budgeting we do that, in our system we do that, and that's what drives into the funding calculations, and also the calculations of DC funded debt and rate funded debt. But we've got this requirement of needing to define the primary purpose and providing financial graphs. So we can do any of that. I suppose the point that you've been raising with us consistently lately is consistency, making sure that we're presenting information that reconciles back every time. So what we would just need is there would be an acknowledgement that there'll be two sets of information, one set that's done on the primary purpose because that's what we're required to do, and then one set that takes all of the elements of funding and shows them separately, and that those two things...
It's really not the elements of funding, it's the split.
The split, so yep.
The
so we
split of those three categories.
Yep. So we can provide you that information, but it will agree at total, but what was called growth in one chart won't reconcile with the dollars of growth in another chart.
So we just need to be very clear, because I don't give that graph is absolutely useless to me.
But it
might be a legislative requirement, but it means nothing to me. So give me the graph that actually is meaningful, and
So just a question. So our 26-27 budget is the annual plan, I'm thinking, yep. So that's the 502,499. What, if any, adjusted. When we come to the pie chart, what's the total? Oh, sorry, that's this year's. Whatever your next year's is, I don't know that number. So when we come to the pie chart of that same thing with the other funding in it, what is the total that you've divided up by into that pie?
So
is that a different
I guess
number?
that's the point I was trying to make, though, in response to Mia Mahi, is if you do all the funding, the numbers will be the same. So how have I funded 500 million of capital? I've divided it by purpose, it's 500 million. I've divided it by funding, it's 500 million. If I can't include all my external funding, like NZTA or whatever, then I won't get to 500 million because I'm only using the portions that relate to depreciation reserve or
we're on two different purposes here. So what I understand from Christine is every project at a project level, we know how much is level of service, how much is renewals, and how much is growth, and then we say the primary purpose is growth. Is that right?
Sorry, that was shorthand. No, we don't load it like that. You choose your primary purpose, or you choose, and you have to choose your funding. So what we're doing in shorthand is saying, hey, if it's loan funded, it's level of service. So no, what you're saying is not correct. We have a funding thing, and that's 100% of the cost is funded. And how? It's funded by a DC and a use of the depreciation reserve, some NZTA funding, and I borrowed as well. And so it's the funding that's in that second set of data.
Okay, so we never have because everything is broken down at some point, but that's not recorded as to the percentages of each.
We do the percentages of funding, and then we know that certain funding sources are more likely to be a level of service or more likely to be growth. And so we say, well, if the funding sources are predominantly rates or depreciation reverse renewal, so we've got a funding source that we call renewal, then that's predominantly going to be renewal, or it's predominantly rates, it's predominantly level of service. And so from those funding sources, we then
but every project at some point, you must break down what is growth, what is renewals, and what is level of service. But you don't record that.
That's done high level and at the activity level or with the growth team will say how much can we fairly claim as DC funded, so that piece of analysis will be done. In terms of can we access the renewals reserve for this, it's a bit more general, but if it's completely just replacing what was there with like for like, then it's renewals. It's really in that other space that so I guess you could say all other sources are level of service. That's the other way to do it. To start with, I mean, work in progress, if you want, we'll say everything that's not growth funded or renewals, because those are tests that have to be satisfied, can sit in the level of service category.
Yeah, you'd have to build some assumptions to then drive the calculations behind around those external funding sources, and whether it's pro-ratering based on the level of service, renewal or growth funding, or you just assume that it's just level of service. You'd have to make that call so we're consistent.
Oh, sorry.
That was going to be my question. Like, how are there any fishhooks in that? Because that seemed the logical way to do it. And also, secondly, given our expensive new IT system, will that allow project managers or whoever makes those calls ultimately to feed that through to the finance team in a way that you can easily collate that?
We just use we would just use the funding assumptions to build that and say you've passed the test for renewal, it's renewal funded. You've passed the test for growth, it's growth. The fishhook will sit in things like NZTA funding or specific government grants for things that have a growth component, because as I understand it, and Christine can confirm or otherwise, growth DC charges come after any separate grant. So if the government said we desperately want Tauriko West and we're going to pay a grant of 30 million, then the balance is where you'd assess the growth portion. So you'd have to, as James kindly pointed out, we'd have to have some more funding categories loaded into the system to take account of those. So growth funded, external funding, and we would have to create those. And so that data would evolve over time, but it's not a huge fish hook. I think we could do it.
Because, I mean, my thinking on it, from what I know, which is a bit dangerous, is that transport would be the big area. And so if you had a system for transport and then just with the very few projects with external funding for other things, you could probably manually kind of do that. But but unless you had a robust system for transport, because otherwise it would be quite misleading by the time you got to the end of it. If you're making too many guesses, you may as well just put the two graphs that we've got now and use our brains to do it.
So yes, there'd be lots of fish hooks like that, and if you're worried about the detail, that would be a risk.
I'm not so worried about the detail. It's more to that what I'm worried about the summary, and the summary being reflective of reality. So the detail only has to be accurate to the extent that the margin of error is not going to go so haywire when you sum up all these projects. So if each project could be out by a little factor, but if that adds up to a big discrepancy. So to me, transport, you just want to have a robust way. Knowing how transport is funded in a bit more detail, I think you'd have to have a system that allocates the three categories, and then the funding from NZTA, you'd have to say, starting off on Cameron Road Stage 2, this much is growth, and then NZTA funding is this much towards growth, IAF is this much towards growth, and you would just have to have that system there that it could feed through from the transport team, I would think.
From that, from what we're hearing, and I don't want to get stuck on this, but I'm quite happy around probably just looking at that funding, and if growth equals DCs, because this is okay, so we're here at this year 200 million of growth, so 200 million of growth projects, we don't have 200 million going to DCs, do we? So growth's not paying 200 million towards those projects. So therefore, I think it's, this is actually quite misleading, and I think it would be, well, yeah, but because if it's a 50% growth project, we say it's a growth project, but I think we'll be much closer to where we should be if it is that DC's renewals, and then every other is level of service, and I think we'll be much more accurate then.
So we can take that away,
Yeah.
and manually we'll do a version of it, and then we can feed it back
Yeah.
in the next update on the program.
So we could have a set of financial numbers that are for compliance reporting purposes, and then a set of financial numbers that are informing you for your decision making, if you're
Yeah.
comfortable with that.
Yeah.
As long as that's, yeah.
Cool. All right. Thank you.
Sorry, that was pretty much the end of the slide deck, I guess, and we just whipped through it. I'll come back to some of the slides in terms of discussion pieces. And I guess it was primarily around this slide and those projects you've been presented with, the 498 million for 26, 27. Sorry, just looking for that, I guess, direction in terms of the quantum, the total quantum, and I guess those bullet points in terms of any feedback. The intent would be, I've got it on one slide, they'll be coming back on the 4th of December, but I know that's not available now, would be an update, I think, on the 15th of December alongside the OPEX component of the annual plan at a council meeting. So, yeah, just looking for, I guess, that direction on those bullet points.
Sorry.
So this is based on the Excel spreadsheet that's ended up in Stella that doesn't have any headers, so you've got 6 pages and you're trying to work out which columns are which. Are you really asking us to say, out of all of those projects, which should have their scope adjusted?
We've got a spreadsheet as well.
Yeah, but it's quite a large lot to say, are we just doing a general, these should have their scope adjusted? I'm just wondering if it's...
It is a general question. We've reviewed the program, we're at 498. If there's no direction in terms of that quantum, whether that's the right quantum at a high level or needs to be lowered, if there's projects that are in that list of projects that you need further updates on, that's what we're looking for in terms of guiding if that 498 needs to be lowered or not, or increased, whether that's happy to proceed to the draft program and be adopted. So that's where I guess we're at. It is a first cut, there is time, I guess, to come back to the team in terms of any comments, but that's what we're looking for.
Yeah, I guess we haven't, and we've discussed it, but we haven't really got a prioritisation framework, which was kind of part of the process, that all these projects are actually, ranked to give us an output. So we haven't got anything at the moment. We can go through the list and say, I don't like that project, or I do like this one, but that was the idea, is actually looking at some of our priorities, trying to then create some sort of ranking system that every project got rated on those priorities and how they worked. So the scope adjustment thing again, I think every project needs to get looked at from both scope but also around delivery, and is there a different or better way to deliver it, that you can do it at a cheaper cost for that scope, that the deferred or stopped, well, we need some sort of framework there that we can actually assess these projects against each other and decide which ones actually meet our priorities more than others, and projects not currently in the program, well, that's something we can certainly bring back as to things that need to be there. So if we just go to the next graph, so that one obviously, committed is a different. So committed, just are we getting, it needs a value for money lens run over it. Renewals, like, just because it's renewals doesn't mean it should just happen. We're getting a lot of pushback. One example, Hopukarori, around people saying, well, why are you spending the money there? And we've got now Papamoa saying, why are you chip sealing our roads? They don't need to be, they're all good. So, just because you've got a renewals budget doesn't mean that it needs to be done. It's just, again, looking at that. Is it really need to be done? And if it does, let's do it. Will be committed. Well, that's a list that we probably need to look at, because we've actually got an opportunity to decide whether it should be committed or not. Critical risk projects, again, as long as the framework is these have to be done, and if we don't do the Wairaki pump station, we're going to have poo all over the roads. So if it really is that, then they do have to be done. But again, that value for money lens and to be assessed, then that's the list that we really want to focus on. But it's not saying we're only going to look at the to be assessed. We want to look at the will be committed lines, and we want to look at the renewals as well, in part of that process. But again, it comes back to, we need the framework to actually look at these projects and say, how much do they meet our priorities, and how, and rank them, so that then we get a list and we go, okay, well, those ones are just no-brainers, because they meet all our priorities and they need to be done. And then these ones are the ones we can actually influence, because we need to make a conscious decision, is that important to us or not?
So just in terms of the prioritisation, so through the exercise, we did go through, mainly focused on the risk aspect of the prioritisation, and mainly focused on a deferral of 12 months. That's where we landed on the critical risk projects. From a priority point of view, I guess we have tentatively scored some projects, but what we're unclear is weightings on the priorities and what the key priorities are. Without that information, it's very hard to score something. But the framework's there, and we do have indicative numbers.
Well, let's come back and we'll give you weightings. Like, that's something we can do quite easily. If you've got the framework there and it just needs us to put weightings in, and it's going to spit out all that priority, we'll commit to doing that. So, Councillor Crowther.
Can you just clarify the critical risk nomenclature? Like, what exactly, like, some of those projects we're not going ahead with this year. So I'm just trying to understand how you've categorised what is the definition of critical risk?
So what we've done with that is against our risk framework, which has the 13 strategic risks. Projects are assessed against, I guess, the component or the category that's most at risk. Most of it is around service delivery, primarily around the waters and transport infrastructure assets, and that's assessed against consequence and likelihood. Anything that scores at a certain threshold becomes a critical risk. There are projects in there from a reputational point of view that if you deferred, there might be a bit of pushback on that.
So that's, just to use an example, the Memorial to City Centre pathway, which we have split views around our table, but we made our decision on it. So it's not a critical risk if we don't do it, it's a critical risk if we do it or don't do it. It's just somehow the political risk on that case, or because it wouldn't affect the city if we don't do it, in the sense of being a critical risk. It might make people go for a longer walk somewhere, but I'm just trying to understand. There are a few projects like that. I'm just looking at accessible streets there, and I think you know my background on that, but I look at it and go, is the low cost, low risk cycle action plan the critical risk, or is it some other things in the cycleway network that are a critical risk? And they're not here. And I'm really struggling to understand why certain projects are in critical risk and certain ones are just in whatever that other category is called. To be assessed. And then other ones are in fact, the other confusing one is, to me, when I look at some of the projects and will be committed, I don't know, will be committed under what circumstances? Like, will be committed if we follow the recommendations, or will be committed as a default? Or
So the will be committed ones are based on their current timeline and phasing of the project. By the 1st of July 2026, they would be moving into construction. So unless you make any conscious decision between now and then, they would go through that process and start construction. So it's just saying that without any intervention, they are likely to be committed.
I guess, well, what I'll highlight then is when I go back to the foundational documents for transport, so I'll just pick on that as the one example, but I don't personally see the categorisation of these projects as fitting the overall high-level goals of that the transport system plan and the connected centres model, and the allocation of funding, I think, is flawed. The Regional Transport Committee said so, but it got pushed through, as we know, by Tauranga City Council at the time in its long-term plan against what the committee wanted. And I think we're going to find in a few years' time we won't have the transport system that we require to alleviate congestion, because we're prioritising the wrong projects at the wrong time, and we need to lift some of those projects, particularly bus infrastructure, which has held back regional council to the extent now that they've basically pulled the pin on funding public transport with any extra money because they haven't got the support from us.
I think that's when we go back to the slide that we had the 3 questions on. Those are the sorts of things we're trying to understand, because at this point we don't have a collective view from you as to whether or not what those priorities are. So you've really well articulated that, that's helpful, but we don't know whether that's the view. So at the moment we're working off the direction that has been previously agreed through a range of documents, and this is where we're seeking, and that's that question about priorities and weightings. If we can get more clarity on that, then we can then change the proposed program. So that's really useful, but it needs to be it needs to be a majority view. Otherwise, we'll carry on developing a program that, when it gets to come to be adopted, it's not supported, and we'll run out of time.
So a way forward, I guess, before adopting the draft is probably a discussion or workshop on those weightings and the priorities. So an agreed approach to that, because then we can take that and apply it to the model, and then we can bring back that model with those applied weightings, and potentially any scenarios that you want to see between some of those outcomes. By then also you would have adopted your risk appetite levels. I think that's coming to audit and risk. That can be taken as well and applied to the risk portion of that model, and we can bring that all back prior to the adoption of the draft annual plan. Yep. So we'll need. Well, I guess there's two workshops. One is fundamentally around the priorities, and one is then a follow up in terms of the annual plan program and the impact of those weightings.
Just quickly on the renewals, I've probably got a bit of a different view to the Mayor on it, but what is that ratio the same as what was set last year in terms of renewals of the overall program?
No, so it's a lot higher because there's projects in there, and you go back to that categorisation of G, O and R, which are a mix. So you've got the likes of the Cambridge Road relocation main, and you've got a whole lot of marine precinct stuff that's coming through. So that has elevated that number. I think if you went back to the percentages, that would drop quite a lot. Yeah.
And then the consequence of that?
In terms of moving renewals out.
Yeah.
Well,
Because it's obviously.
I guess it's a trade-off between increased operational costs and upfront CAPEX. But that is something that I guess the individual teams could comment on. I know there's already been a workshop on depreciation, and that renewal discussion was had, but we can certainly come back to it. And around that renewals program, we could provide some commentary or impact of deferral in terms of failure rate or increased OPEX, if that's what you'd like
And I
to see.
suppose the preface to that, and again, is that if you're coming from, you've reacted and responded to the public earlier saying there's too much based on growth, we need to make sure we're doing our renewals, and then we go and pull back for whatever reason, we just becomes a bit of a pendulum swing, which is I think we need to figure out a long-term priority and stick to it.
Yeah, and I think you've given us a clear principle, which is we look after what we've got. I think the question that you're asking us, how are you making the decision that it does need to be renewed, that the asset is actually at its life? So as I think James talked about, I think there has been a workshop on it, but maybe it didn't hit the target or we weren't clear. So we had, I think we've had one on sweating the assets, but we can bring back further work on that, and maybe what we need to do, maybe some practical examples of in each infrastructure type, maybe. So because I think sometimes we talk about lots of words, but we're not bringing it as a tangible example. So I'm just thinking maybe that might help to talk about decisions that have been made to proceed with a renewal and decisions that have been made not to proceed with a new renewal, and why we've done that. So that this is a methodology we use. Would that be helpful?
Yeah, well, I guess we've had that workshop, but then subsequent examples have come across the desk where actually what we were told is not 100% accurate. And one example was a road, and basically because what we got told is we've got a renewals program, but we'll assess the road and or whatever it is, we assess it, and if we can put it out a few years, we do. But if it's in critical need, and then we hear an example where the response from the staff to people is, oh well, it's hit the 30 years and we're doing it. So there wasn't an assessment. There wasn't it wasn't because it was just that it hit the timeline, we had the budget, we did it. So that's the disconnect, and this is probably the argument around Hopakarori is we know for a fact that a lot of those equipment still have a 2 or 3 year time frame left in their life cycle, but it's in the budget and it's scheduled to do it. So, yeah.
If I may add to that, am I speaking into that? When you talk about renewals, there is usually a condition-based cycle, so that you will not replace it too soon. There could also be an age-related item because of the risk increase, the risk of something breaking. And it might be different if you want to consider different levels of service as well. If we're happy for say, a road to end up with a number of potholes before we replace it. That is an easier conversation to have on renewables than proactively doing it when it might appear that it is not ready for renewal, but in reality the risk of something happening might have increased just due to its age. I don't know how you would prefer to have a conversation or a deep dive into how we do renewals based on both risk and condition and sometimes other reasons.
I guess that what we were told is all about condition. So like if something comes to the end of 30 years and that's its life cycle, then they'll go and look at the condition and say, look, like I get it, you know, there's starting to be some surface cracks, and while it doesn't really look like it needs to be done, like if you examine it closely, you go, look, we're going to, so absolutely do it then. But what we've had is a few examples where, you know, it was, that's what we got told, and this is what we thought was happening, and then in a few instances it's, oh no, it was like the justification from staff, it was at the end of its life, so we did it. But there, you know, because we were told that they're going to do a condition assessment, and when it was asked, where's the condition assessment? Oh, we didn't do a condition assessment. It hit 30 years, we're doing it. So that's the disconnect.
I understand the disconnect.
Yeah.
I just wanted to bring risk as well as condition.
Oh yeah, no,
into the
absolutely.
conversation.
But
especially when you start talking about water infrastructure as well,
Yeah.
right? That's where you have possibly a lower risk tolerance,
yeah,
etc.
yeah, well, absolutely, because yeah, and that's, you can't see it. So
Until it's too late.
yeah, until you've got Wellington with water coming out the street. Yeah, sorry.
I don't think it's an education point of view. I think we've had the workshop, we understand how we go about it. Perhaps it's a reporting thing. Maybe when we have a renewal, there's a narrative that says we've assessed this. This is the reason that we're actually putting it forward for renewal. Maybe a bit more information in that area would help us have comfort that it is ready to tick off and go.
Yeah. And it might be worthwhile, I don't know the particular examples, but maybe if offline we can get those particular examples. Sometime it may be that this condition assessment wasn't done, or it may be that the staff who made the statement weren't aware of the detail that's sitting behind it. So it'd be quite good to get to the bottom of that for the particular examples that you've raised. And I don't know what the facts are, so.
Well, like that's the thing is if what we were told in the workshop and how it's done, and that's the process we're going through, I'm actually quite comfortable with that. But in practicality, it doesn't always happen like that, and that's the issue. Yep. You know, like if that's the case, I agree. Let's do it, but we need a reason to do it. Yep. Like it's not just it's at the end of its life we're doing it.
Yep. So we're happy offline to take those specific examples that you're referring to. Then we can go away and find out about them and report back, because then either they do or they don't. We'll find out what the facts are, and come back to you on that.
Yeah. Again, I reiterate. I think if we had to pause and go, this is the reason we're doing it, and it's got to get past this team, and that was in the paperwork, I think things would flow easier and we wouldn't have these questions later where we think it hasn't been done.
Yeah, this is an area that I've got quite a bit of experience in. Companies with large asset bases have a renewals program for a reason. You assign a life to a thing, road, pipe, whatever, and when that comes to its end of life on the paper, you then make a risk assessment based on what you think is going to happen and your life of experience. And if you think it needs to be renewed, you renew it then, because you've made that based on your years of experience. And if you don't do it, then you've opened yourself up to a massive risk of failure. And if you do that too many times in your renewals program, you end up with potentially 10 items that have to be done in that 1 year. And then that could put strain on the system, both your contractors, both your balance sheet, and you've got to avoid that. So having a very well layered renewals programs where things are sequenced well, you know when you're doing it, and you can then fit that in with other programs like pipe work with roads. You do it together, there way you can savings on your renewal program by sequencing things together. You make a more effective operational team, and your team works better together when they know what's coming. So making too many changes to a renewals program based on what we around this table think is a flawed system. Yep. We need to trust our team to make the correct decision about what needs to be renewed in each calendar year, because they've got a 10 years or 15 years of work in front of them, and if we make little changes, it really affects what comes in the preceding years. So you need to be very careful how we do it, but the renewals program, I think, is in-house and it works well, and it's a huge program of work. It's a massive volume of work to get through.
I don't disagree with anything you've said. I just want to see the process and the justification. If they renew something, I want to see the reasoning why they did it. Not, and unfortunately, I've seen a number of cases where, Jen's lights, where they haven't done a condition assessment. They've just said it's on the number says it's renewal. Let's do it. So if you go through the proper process, I have no argument around what you're saying. But when a member of the public comes and says to us, what process did you go through? Oh, well, actually we didn't. It was the end of its life. Then we're not following the process. So.
Yeah, but I've replaced a lot of stuff that looks like it's almost brand new. But I can tell you, if you take a microscopic look at it, it's not far from complete and total failure. Yeah, I know, but that's based on the decision of the teams to make a look at what they know based on their years of experience.
To hone in on an example, just because I'm trying to understand the numbers, whether they're, like in some cases, for instance, Cameron Road Stage 2, it's the most recent numbers, I think, that we know for that project. And some projects we don't know what the number will be, like Memorial Aquatic, so that just presumably has to be what it is. But then I've got, for instance, the Tariko, or not Tariko, what do they call it? The bus facility improvements Tauranga Crossing, 28 million over the next 3 or 4 years. And I'm looking at that going, that differs quite a lot from what we heard in our Transport Committee around our commitment to that facility out there. Are there multiple facilities, or is that number an old number when it was previously going to be a different kind of item for our facility?
So at this stage, the numbers you've got in front of you, we're using as an aggregate at the moment because we do have that prioritisation piece to work through. You talked about accessible streets and walking and cycling earlier. Those are currently bundled up in projects that won't proceed and they need to be unbundled. And so what actually ends up in the program is yet to come back to you. So it's a bit of a horse and cart situation that we're in there.
But where, like for instance, for the Tauranga Crossing bus facility, where would those numbers have come from? Were they LTP numbers?
LTP numbers, yeah.
Because it's a bit, I think one of the problems I've got with this is we've got some which are not LTP numbers and some which are LTP numbers and some which are revised LTP numbers. And I think it'd be really good to get, if we can get a next iteration which has the more realistic, which are the latest numbers. And particularly for projects, I'm not so worried if it's like $12,000 or something, but if we're talking about 30 million bucks, it'd be good if we're actually only going to spend 5 million, which I think is what we're hearing, that makes a $25 million difference over the, and some of that's concentrated in our term of council, so it'll probably be of a special interest to this council. So it'd be great to get that kind of, just to sense check it, whether that's going to change the whole big rocks and all that other stuff.
Agreed, it will change the big rocks, and that's the long-term planning process. So what we've asked staff to do, and for the most part, is deal with the annual plan. And obviously when they're multi-year and you're updating the annual plan, you're updating the following years. But the LTP time frame is when people will be gearing all their pre-work and then their resourcing into loading the correct numbers, and that will happen next year. So we can't do it.
So what,
annual plan
realistically, what can we decide this year? Because I guess that's what I'd kind of forgotten that. That's the same old thing I always try to do, which is to do an LTP amendment. So given we can't do that, given how much we've committed, given your definitions of will be committed, and we won't have oversight of the actual numbers for that, like, do we have to sort of fly blind about and just kind of make some decisions the best we can, or or are you kind of saying as staff, we don't really have much choice. We just got to sort of wave through a total and let you work within that total, because we don't have enough visibility, in my view, to, and unless I do what I would like to do, which is go in and say, I actually think you need to spend more on these bus facilities and you need to spend less on this. And, you know, I've got some ideas I'm happy to share, but everyone will have different ideas. And that could be quite a mess if we don't have a framework around it.
That's why we have a prioritisation framework, and we put in all the numbers and it spits out the numbers.
But that's the LTP framework, which I've heard even strong supporters of the LTP around this table say that they don't support some of the stuff in the LTP. So all I'm asking is, if we don't support some of those projects as priority, then can we work through that, or is the prioritisation framework designed to push through the projects in the LTP?
The prioritisation is your decision. So there is no process to drive through the LTP projects because they were approved by the Commission. They are there and they have gone through a legislative process. So they sit there. There is, every annual plan, there is an opportunity to change your direction or your investment focus or priority or delivery. There are certain projects that you can't shift, as you know, and that's really what we're asking for. So because we have nothing else, we are working off the strategic framework, the asset investment plans and the LTP. If you provide a specific direction on any particular areas that you want more or less of when you've looked at that, that's what we need to know, and then we can modify it, but it needs to be a majority view, otherwise it's too hard for us to, because we keep moving. You have talked about the overall action investment plans and the strategies, and you looked at that and you've pretty much said we're happy broadly with that. There are some areas that we want to tweak, and the annual plan is your first place to tweak. So it's really what we're looking here around, is there a majority view about more or less, particularly in those areas that are, you know, not committed, probably not water and wastewater, taking into account that there's a need to provide clarity and sufficient confidence that the right investment decisions are being made and that we're making the investments at the right time. It's more in those other things about the outcomes that investments are delivering, which is around public transport, community amenity, recreation spaces. Is that balance right? Are we getting the right outcomes that you're looking for?
I'll offer one thing, which is, I think it's appalling that a city of our size is spending $16,800 only on bus shelter renewals when we're getting complaints regularly from our community on it. And Tembi Powell, when he was mayor, said that there would be a multi-million dollar, you know, I think he promised tens of millions of dollars spending on it. We're still only budgeting $61,000 next year. This is like the heart of one of the core issues for our city, is to move people around the city according to our strategic framework, and it's a fundamental to try and encourage people to do it. And we're spending $16,800, and yet we're spending mega millions on things that will be not supported by our community. I just think we're out of sync, and we have to look at those kind of things and do a sense check. Even if we're not doing an LTPA, we have to start thinking seriously about addressing what our community wants, repeatedly calling for, rather than the things that are on the plan.
Right, is there any other comments before we wrap up? If not, thank you, staff, and I'll hand back to Councillor Ralston to finish us off with a karakia. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Kia noi tātou. Kia tātou ka tō te atawhai o tō tātou reki o I karaite me te aroa te atua me te whiwhi taitanga ki te wairua tapu mo ake amene.
Thank you very much, and I declare the workshop closed. Thank you. No, but it's in we had a whole lot of communication.
Okay, so it'll be somewhere know it comes through your office.
Yeah, it always it's gone through the roading team.
Oh, okay, right.
Again, I don't have an issue with their justification, but they've told us they're going to do a condition assessment. They